Hey guys, so tragically, I literally just recorded this purposeful encounter and then deleted it off of my Mac. So I'm back for round two, purposeful encounter one. Here we are to focus on an encounter with somebody from childhood through early adolescence. And for this purposeful encounter, I had a conversation with my youngest sister. Her name's Carmen. So for those of you that don't know me as well, Carmen is the youngest out of all of my siblings. There's an extreme age difference between us. She's actually 13 years younger than me, so she is 11. So obviously in growing up with Carmen my entire life, I've been able to see her transform and develop on a cognitive, social, psychological, emotional level. So this purposeful encounter, though it was familiar and was someone I have a close relationship with, I do feel that it was very impactful and really highlighted some of the developmental theories that we've been talking about in lifespan. So the conversation that we had, it was short, it was casual. She did not know that it was for school, and that was just to kind of preserve some of the intimacy and the genuineness to our conversation. So I had her over here, over my house, and we were having a Harry Potter movie night. But before we got the movie started, I just sort of dove into a conversation with her to really get, honed in on some social factors, especially surrounding school. Since it's the end of the school year, I thought it was natural to sort of open up a conversation with her and just ask, how's school going? How are your friends? Things like that. So some background things to know about Carmen is as an 11-year-old girl, she is socially what I would consider advanced for her age. She is the funniest, wittiest, most sarcastic person that I know, and she has a very intelligent sense of humor. Her best friend, who has been her best friend for about 9 years now, is actually a boy, and his name is Nick. So something really interesting that I uncovered during our purposeful encounter was that though her best friendship with Nick is still very important to her, what I'm starting to see is a shift in her little schemas surrounding gender. So when I asked how Nick was, she actually said, well, he's good, but I'm starting to hang out with more of my girlfriends now. At lunch tables, there's certain groups that sit at lunch tables, and I sit at a lunch table with all girls. So developmentally and from, a social perspective, what I'm seeing here is, again, a shift in the way she's thinking about sex and gender and how children in middle childhood or ages 9 to 11 are really starting to gravitate towards peer groups of their same sex. So even though Carmen's best friend has been a boy for her entire childhood, I'm starting to see a shift and an expansion in her social group. She's also starting to recognize the formation of cliques in schools, which, in this day and age, truthfully, the formation of cliques is starting so much earlier than I even witnessed it when I was in grade school. But that's something, very notable that I took away from our conversation. Further with that, what I'm really starting to see is in asking her about school, she's starting to grasp more in-depth academic concepts. What she's able to do is think about things more concretely, removing herself from solely an egocentric mindset, and she's really able to place herself in the perspective of others as well. So I have a younger brother as well. They're very close in age, only 16 months apart, and Michael is 13, recently turned 13. So when I also asked her, how's your brother doing with school, she was really able to put herself into his shoes and speak from his perspective, which, talking about a child in middle childhood, this is really an advancement that we're seeing from the typical child egocentric mindset where they're only able to think about themselves, their needs, their schemas, and their very limited worldview that's forming. So what I'm able to see in her is more of an expansion in her worldview and the formation that's allowing her not only to empathize with other people's experiences, but to really step outside of that perspective and take the perspective of someone not only her of a different sex, but older than her as well. So her being able to comment things like, oh, well, he's doing well in school, but, being a boy can be hard like being a girl is sometimes. That also shows more of an advanced cognitive concept that she's able to grasp in that sadly bullying's taking place younger and younger as the generations progress. And she's able to recognize through observing and seeing things outside of her own needs and her own perspectives that boys get picked on too. And she was able to comment on specifics like what organizations and sports teams are cool to be a part of, what brands are good to get, things like that. And the fact that she was simply able to observe those and, recount that for me just showed a higher level of cognitive functioning, a social sort of observation that's formed very recently. We're talking within the last 12 to 24 months in her as an 11-year-old. So that was really interesting to see. I know, of course, as a sister, there's sort of a protective nature that kicks in when we're talking about school, but it really is fascinating to see that at such a young age, such crucial components to the worldview is starting to come together. So, from a cognitive perspective, grasping more intangible concepts, more complicated academic things in school. From a social perspective, we're seeing more empathy formation and the ability to identify emotionally with other people beyond just the soul self. And so all of that really contributed to a good conversation with her. Though it was brief and 5.5 minutes is hardly, enough to really hone in on these developmental theories, I think we're certainly able to see that as a child in middle childhood, she is certainly on par, if not advanced, with some of the things that we're typically seeing as hallmarks or milestones in that point in childhood. So it was a really interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have for your purposeful encounters, and I will see you all in a few Mondays.